The Valorian fleet commander stared at his tactical display with disbelief as the tiny human cargo hauler accelerated directly toward his armada. "What is that fool doing?" he muttered. "Commander," his tactical officer reported, "the human vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. Put it through." Captain Yun Tyson's face appeared on the main screen, and he looked calm despite the impossibility of his situation. "This is Captain Tyson of the cargo hauler Persistent Dawn," he announced. "I am addressing the Valorian fleet and the Architect Sanctuary simultaneously, because what I have to say concerns you both." The commander leaned forward with interest. "Speak quickly, human, before we destroy you. You have come here to kill a child," Tyson said. "A little girl who never asked for the power she carries, and who has hurt no one by choice. That creature is a threat to the entire galaxy," the commander replied coldly. "She is a child," Tyson repeated. "And yes, her power is dangerous. But power alone does not make someone a monster. Choice does," the commander laughed. "You think philosophy will stop us from doing what must be done? No," Tyson admitted. "I think nothing will stop you because you have already decided that fear justifies murder. But I'm not speaking to convince you. I am speaking so that history will know what happened here." He leaned closer to the camera. "I am speaking so that when Velith grows up and learns to control her power, she will know that a human stood between her and those who wanted to kill her. She will know that not everyone in the galaxy looked at her and saw a monster. And that knowledge will shape who she becomes." The commander's expression darkened. Pretty words, but meaningless in the face of superior force. "All ships target the human vessel," and a new alarm cut through his command, and his tactical officer shouted in confusion, "Commander, the Sanctuary is activating some kind of energy field. On every screen throughout the fleet, the ancient Architect Station came alive with light that pulsed in patterns that seemed to reach into the minds of everyone watching." The commander felt something strange happening inside his head. Images flooded his consciousness, and he saw things that should have been impossible. He saw Velith as a child reaching out to touch a flower with wonder in her eyes. He saw her weeping over a dead bird and trying desperately to bring it back to life. He saw her learning to read and laughing at stories and drawing pictures of her mother and dreams of darkness that terrified her. He saw her choosing not to destroy the warship in the asteroid field, even though she had the power to kill everyone aboard. He saw her looking at a human cargo captain with love and trust and hope. And he saw what she could become, not a destroyer of worlds, but a healer of wounds and a bridge between species and a light. In the darkness that had threatened to consume the galaxy for millennia, the vision ended and the commander found tears streaming down his face. Around him, his bridge crew were experiencing the same thing, and many of them were openly weeping. "Commander," his tactical officer said in a shaking voice, "I do not think I can fire on that child." The commander wanted to argue, but the images were burned into his mind, and he could not unsee what the Sanctuary had shown him. That child was not a monster, she was a miracle. "The Architect AI is speaking," his communications officer reported. The ancient voice echoed through every ship in the fleet. "You have witnessed the truth of the hybrid's nature," it announced. "She is not an extinction variable, but an evolution variable." The prophecy spoke of two outcomes, because her power amplifies whatever she is taught. If she is taught that she is a monster, she will become one. If she is taught that she can be a protector, she will become one. The human has taught her the second path. If you destroy her now, you will prove that the galaxy deserves the darkness that would have followed. If you allow her to live, you may have saved every civilization that exists. The choice is yours. Silence fell across the fleet. The commander looked at the tiny human ship floating between his armada and the Sanctuary one. Man standing against impossible odds for the sake of a child he barely knew. "Why?" the commander asked finally. "Why would a human risk everything for an alien child who will kill him with her very presence?" Taysen's voice came through the communication channel, because that is who we are. Humans have always protected those who cannot protect themselves. We have always believed that every life has value regardless of where it comes from or what it might become. Your people think we are weak because we bond with anything and sacrifice ourselves for strangers. But that is not weakness. That is our greatest strength. The commander closed his eyes and made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. All ships stand down. He ordered. Voices erupted across the bridge in confusion and protest, but he silenced them with a raised hand. I will not murder a child because of what she might become. I will not prove that my people deserve whatever destruction would follow. He looked at Taysen's image on the screen. You have my word, human, that no Valorian weapon will be raised against that child today. But know this, I will be watching, and if she becomes the monster our prophecies fear, I will return. She will not. Taysen said with absolute certainty. I believe you. The commander replied quietly, and I do not understand why, but I believe you. The Valorian fleet began withdrawing, and one by one the massive warships turned away from the sanctuary and jumped into hyperspace within minutes. The space around the ancient station was empty, except for the persistent Don. Taysen let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. The sanctuary doors were fully open now, and he could see Sareth and Veleth standing at the entrance, watching him. He guided his ship toward them, and when he stepped out of the airlock, Veleth ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. You did not leave me, she sobbed. I told you I never would. He answered. Sareth approached with tears in her eyes and something in her expression that had not been there before, respect and gratitude, and something that might have been hope. You saved her. The princess said, you saved all of us. The sanctuary saved us. Taysen corrected. I just talked for a while. The ancient voice spoke again. The human's intervention has been noted and recorded. His influence on the hybrid's development has been designated as essential to positive outcome probability. Medical protocols have been initiated. Taysen felt warmth spreading through his body, and he looked down to see the dark patterns beneath his skin beginning to fade. What is happening? He asked. The hybrid has made her first conscious choice, the voice explained. She has chosen to heal rather than harm. Her power is responding to that choice. Veleth looked up at him with glowing eyes, and her small hands pressed against his chest. I can feel the sickness in you, she said, and I can feel how to make it stop. I do not know how I know, but I know. Light flowed from her fingers into Taysen's body, and he felt years of damage and decay reversing themselves. When she finally stepped back, he felt stronger than he hadn't. Decadizareth gasped and touched her own skin, where the dark patterns were also fading. She is healing me too, the princess whispered with wonder. The sanctuary voice spoke one final time. Baseline stability approaching acceptable parameters. The hybrid has demonstrated capacity for control through positive intention. Revised probability of salvation outcome 83%. Recommendation: continue human influence indefinitely. Taysen looked at Veleth and smiled. It looks like I will be staying for a while. The child smiled back at him with joy and love and boundless hope. Good, she said, because I have many more questions about your people, and I want to learn everything. Sareth took Taysen's hand and squeezed it gently. Thank you, she said, not as a princess to a commoner, but as a mother to the man who saved my daughter. You showed her what she could become, and that gift is beyond any payment I could offer. Taysen looked out at the stars beyond the sanctuary. Somewhere out there, the Valorian commander was reporting what he had witnessed, and that report would spread throughout the galaxy. The story of a human who stood alone against an armada for the sake of a child. The story of a species that protected what they loved regardless of cost. I did not do anything special, Taysen said quietly. I just did what any human would do. Veleth took his hand, and her ancient eyes sparkled with understanding. That is what makes you special. she said. "You do not realize how rare you are." She looked out at the same stars with wonder and determination in her young face. "When I learn to control my power, I am going to protect people the way you protected me. I am going to show the galaxy what humans taught me. That kindness is stronger than fear, and that hope is not foolishness, but strength." Tayson smiled and squeezed her hand somewhere. In the vast darkness between stars, a new story was beginning, a story of a child who learned to be a hero because a human showed her it was possible, and that story would echo through the Space Orcs ages long after they were all gone, because that is what humans do. They change things, one act of stubborn, impossible hope at a time. The coordinates led them to an asteroid that looked like any other dead rock drifting through the void. But as the persistent dawn approached the surface of that rock began to shift and change, revealing massive doors that had remained hidden for 10,000 years. "The sanctuary," Sareth whispered with awe and relief flooding her voice as Tayson guided the ship toward those ancient doors, and as they drew closer, lights began to glow along the asteroid's surface, tracing patterns that hurt his eyes to look at. Direct live left pressed her face against the viewport, and the patterns beneath her skin pulsed in response to the patterns on the asteroid, as if they were speaking to each other in a language only they understood. "It recognizes me," the child said softly. "I can feel it welcoming me home." The massive doors began to open, and beyond them, Tayson could see a vast chamber filled with structures that defied human understanding of architecture, and physics towers of crystal spiraled upward into darkness, and bridges of pure light connected platforms that floated without any visible support. It was beautiful and terrifying and ancient beyond imagination. Then a voice spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Hybrid detected." The voice announced in tones that resonated in Tayson's bones. "Genetic analysis confirms architect lineage at 47% compatibility. Warning detected. Power matrix unstable and expanding. Entry denied." The doors stopped moving and then began to close again. "No," Sareth shouted. "You must let us in." "Entry denied." The voice repeated. "The hybrid's power matrix exceeds containment parameters. Allowing entry would result in catastrophic destabilization of sanctuary systems. Risk assessment. Unacceptable." Tayson slammed his fist against the console in frustration. "There must be something we can do. The hybrid must achieve baseline stability before entry can be permitted." The voice explained. "Current probability of achieving baseline stability without intervention, 0.3%. Recommendation: termination of hybrid to prevent galactic extinction event." Veleth made a small sound of fear, and Sareth wrapped her arms around her daughter protectively. "You were built to protect architect children." The princess shouted at the ceiling. "How can you recommend killing one? This unit was built to protect the galaxy." The voice corrected. "Architect children were considered assets to that mission, but the hybrid represents a variable that was never anticipated. Prophecy files indicate two possible outcomes from hybrid existence: salvation of galactic civilization or extinction of all organic life. Current behavioral analysis suggests extinction. Probability at 68%. Termination remains the recommended course of action." Tayson looked at Veleth and saw a terrified child who had just been told by an ancient machine that she should die. He thought about everything he had witnessed since meeting her. He thought about her kindness, and her fear, and her desperate desire not to hurt anyone. And he thought about the moment in the asteroid field when she had used her power to disable that warship. She could have destroyed it. She could have killed everyone aboard. Instead, she had simply made them stop. "Your analysis is wrong," Tayson said firmly. The voice paused. "Clarify. You are calculating her future based on her power alone." Tayson explained. "But power is not destiny, and potential is not certainty. Human philosophy is not relevant to this assessment." The voice replied. Human philosophy is the only thing that is relevant. Tayson shot back, because your calculations cannot account for choice. He stood from his seat and faced the nearest crystalline structure that he assumed contained the AI sensors. My species nearly destroyed itself a dozen times. Throughout our history, he said, we developed weapons that could have ended all life on our world, and by your calculations, we should have used them. But we chose not to. Your species is statistically anomalous. The voice admitted. Human decision-making patterns do not conform to predictive models. Exactly, Tayson said. And Velith is half human now. He gestured toward the child. Not by blood, but by influence, because I have spent days teaching her about my people and about what we believe. She has learned that power does not have to corrupt, and that those who are feared can choose to be protectors instead of destroyers. The voice was silent for a long moment. Continue. It finally said. Tayson knelt in front of Velith and took her hands in his. Tell them what you told me, he said gently. Tell them what you want to become. Velith looked at the crystal towers with fear in her ancient eyes. I do not want to hurt anyone, she said in a small voice. I know my power is dangerous, and I know people are afraid of me, but I do not want to be a monster. Tears streamed down her face. Captain Tayson showed me that I have a choice, and I choose to be good. I choose to protect people instead of destroying them. I choose to be like him. The sanctuary was silent, and Tayson held his breath while ancient systems processed what they had heard. Then, the voice spoke again. Behavioral analysis updated. New variable detected. Human. Influence on hybrid decision-making patterns. Recalculating extinction probability. More silence. Results inconclusive. The voice announced. The human variable introduces chaos into predictive models that cannot be resolved through standard analysis. Recommendation updated. Observation and intervention rather than termination. The massive doors began opening again. The hybrid may enter under restricted conditions. The human must remain as continued influence stabilizer. Sareth let out a cry of relief and hugged her daughter tightly, but Tayson felt his heart grow heavy because he knew what this meant. He would have to stay here with Velith for how long it took for her to learn control, and his body was already dying from exposure to her power. How long? He asked the voice. Until the hybrid achieves baseline stability. Estimated timeline, between 3 and 7 standard years. Sareth looked at Tayson with horror in her eyes, because they both knew he did not have that long. The human cellular degradation is noted. The voice added, Architect medical technology may be able to slow the process, but reversal is beyond current capabilities. Can you give me enough time? Tayson asked. Probability of survival to hybrid baseline stability. 12%. I will take those odds. Tayson said. Quiet Lisrith stepped toward him with tears in her eyes. Captain, you cannot. I already made my choice, Princess. Tayson interrupted gently. Back at that station when I carried you onto my ship. He looked at Velith, who watched him, with wonder and grief and love all mixed together in her ancient eyes. Some things are worth dying for, and she is one of them. The sensors suddenly screamed with new warnings, and Tayson rushed to the console. More ships were dropping out of hyperspace. Many more ships. The 2 remaining Valorian warships had called for reinforcements, and now a full battle fleet was forming between them and the sanctuary. Entry must occur immediately. The voice warned. If the hybrid is captured or destroyed while her power matrix is unstable, the resulting energy release will sterilize this region of the galaxy. Tayson looked at the fleet and then at the slowly opening doors. They would never make it in time, not unless someone bought them the time they needed. Sareth, he said with sudden calm, take Velith into the sanctuary. What are you going to do? The princess demanded. Tayson did not answer. Instead, he reached out and put his hand on Velith's cheek. Remember what I taught you, he said softly. Remember that you have a choice in who you become. Captain Tayson. Velith whispered with fear in her voice. Please do not leave me. I am not leaving you. He promised. I am giving you time. He looked at Sareth. Get her inside and do not look back. The princess held his gaze for a long moment, and then she nodded. Once, with tears streaming down her silver face, she took her daughter's hand and pulled her toward the airlock vault, fought against her mother's grip, and screamed Tayson's name as she was dragged away. Tayson turned back to his console, and his hands moved across the controls with calm precision. The persistent dawn turned away from the sanctuary and accelerated toward the Valorian fleet, one small cargo hauler against an armada. It was suicide, and Tayson knew it, but he had made his choice a long time ago. Some things were worth dying for. Tayson sat in the medical bay of his ship and stared at the scanner readings that confirmed everything Sareth had told him. Dark patterns were already forming beneath his skin, and though they were faint and barely visible, they were unmistakably present. He had perhaps 2 weeks before the cellular breakdown became irreversible, and perhaps a month before his body failed completely. In the corner of the medical bay, Princess Sareth sat with her head bowed and her hands clasped together, as if in prayer. How long have you known? Tayson asked quietly. Since Velith was 3 years old, Sareth answered without looking up. The servants who helped raise her began showing symptoms, and at first we thought it was a disease. Her voice cracked with old grief. By the time we understood the truth, it was too late for them. How many? 14. Sareth whispered. 14 people who loved my daughter and died because of that love. Tayson set down the scanner and leaned back against the medical table. And you knew this when you asked me to help you. Yes. You knew you were asking me to die. Yes. Sareth finally looked up, and her eyes were red with tears that had long since run dry. I am a monster, Captain Young Tayson, and I have no defense for what I have done. She stood and moved toward the door. I will take Velith to the escape pod, and we will leave your ship, and you can return to your life. Sit down. Tayson said. Sareth froze with her hand on the doorframe. I said, sit down, princess. Slowly she turned and returned to her seat with confusion written across her silver features. Tayson crossed his arms and studied her with calm eyes that betrayed nothing of his inner thoughts. You said there is a sanctuary at those coordinates. He said, a place where Velith can be safe. Yes, but can she learn to control her power there? Sareth hesitated before answering. The sanctuary was built by the architects before they vanished, and it contains their knowledge and their technology. If anywhere in the galaxy can help her, it is there. Then we continue. Tayson said. Simplizareth stared at him as if he had spoken in a language she did not understand. Did you hear what I told you? She demanded. You are dying because of my daughter, and every moment you spend near her brings you closer to death. I heard you. Then why would you continue to help us? Tayson was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice carried the weight of memories he rarely shared. When I was a boy, my home world was invaded by raiders. He said, they burned our cities and killed anyone who resisted and took the rest as slaves. Sareth listened in silence as the human captain continued. My family hid in the ruins of our home for 3 days, and on the 4th day, a stranger found us. He was a traitor from another system, and he had no reason to help us, but he loaded my family onto his ship and flew us to safety. Tayson met her eyes. The raiders shot down his ship as we escaped, and he died so that strangers could live. That is a sad story, Sareth said softly. It is a human story, Tayson replied. My species has always been willing to die for the right reasons, and the question I ask myself now is whether this is one of those reasons. He stood and walked to the doorway where he paused and looked back at the princess. Your daughter did not choose to be born with this power, and she does not deserve to die because others fear what she might become. If helping her reach safety costs me my life, then that is a price I am willing to pay. Sareth's composure finally broke, and she buried her face in her hands and wept. Tayson left her there, and walked through the corridor toward the cabin where Velith waited. He found the child sitting on the bunk with her tablet in her hands, and she looked up when he entered with those ancient eyes that saw too much. "My mother told you the truth." Velith said it was not a question. She did. "Are you angry with me?" Tayson knelt in front of the child so that their eyes were level. "Why would I be angry with you?" "Because I am hurting you." Velith whispered. "I can feel it happening, but I do not know how to stop it." Tears spilled down her silver cheeks. "I do not want to hurt anyone, but I always do, and everyone who loves me dies." Tayson reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face. "Listen to me, Velith, because this is important." Child looked at him with desperate hope. "You are not responsible for what is happening," Tayson said firmly. "You did not choose this power, and you did not ask to be born this way. But people die. People die for many reasons." Tayson interrupted gently. "Sometimes they die for causes they believe in, and sometimes they die protecting people they care about." He took her small hands in his. "If I die helping you reach safety, it will not be your fault, and it will not be a tragedy. It will be my choice and my gift to you." Vela stared at him with wonder in her ancient eyes. "Humans are very strange," she said. "So I have been told." The ship suddenly shuddered, and the alarm system screamed to life with warnings of approaching vessel. Steezen rushed to the cockpit with Velith close behind him, and what he saw on the sensors made his heart sink. 3 Valorian warships had dropped out of hyperspace directly in their path, and their weapons were already charging. "They found us," Sarah said from the doorway with her face pale but determined. "How is that possible? They must have tracked my ship's emergency beacon before it died." The communication console crackled, and a stern Valorian face appeared on the screen. "Human vessel, you are ordered to surrender the extinction variable immediately," the commander announced. "If you comply, you and the traitor princess will be granted quick deaths. If you resist, you will be captured, and your deaths will take considerably longer." Tayson studied the tactical display and calculated their odds of escape. 3 warships against 1 cargo hauler was no contest by any conventional measure. But Tayson had not survived 30 years in the frontier of space by thinking conventionally. "Velith," he said calmly, "I need you to go to the cargo hold and strap yourself in." "What are you going to do?" the child asked. "Something humans are famous for," Tayson answered with a grim smile. "Something stupid." He turned to Sareth. "Can you operate weapon systems?" The princess straightened and something of her royal bearing returned. "I was trained in ship combat before I could walk." "Good, because you are about to see how humans fight when we are outmatched." The Valorian commander was still demanding their surrender when Tayson cut the communication and pushed his ship into a steep dive toward the asteroid field below them. The warships opened fire, and the persistent dawn twisted through a storm of energy blasts that turned the void into a hellscape of light and destruction. Sarth gasped and gripped her console as the ship rolled and spun in ways that should have been impossible for a vessel of its size. "How are you doing this?" she shouted over the screaming of stressed hull plates. "Humans do not fly like this." "Humans fly however we need to fly," Tayson replied through gritted teeth. "And right now we need to be unpredictable." He plunged the ship into the asteroid field. And suddenly, the advantage shifted. The Valorian warships were larger and more powerful, but they were also designed for precision and elegance. They could not follow where Tayson led. The persistent dawn wove between tumbling rocks and through narrow gaps that scraped paint from the hull while the warships were forced to go around. But there were 3 of them and only 1 of him, and slowly they began to close the trap. "They are cutting off our escape routes," Sareth warned. "I know. We cannot outrun them forever. I know." The ship shuddered as a glancing blow struck their rear shields, and Tayson felt blood running from a cut on his forehead. Where he had struck the console behind him, he heard a small cry of fear. Velith had not gone to the cargo hold, She stood in the doorway with tears streaming down her face and her hands pressed against her chest. The dark patterns beneath her skin were blazing with terrible light. "I can feel them," she whispered. "I can feel the people on those ships who want to hurt us." "Velith, get back," Sareth shouted, but the child did not move. Instead, she closed her eyes and reached out with something that was not her hands on the tactical display one of. The Valorian warship suddenly went dark. Its engines failed, and its weapons powered down, and it began drifting helplessly through the asteroid field. Velith opened her eyes, and they burned with the same light that danced beneath her skin. "I made them stop," she said, with wonder and terror in her voice. "I do not know how, but I made them stop." The other two warships hesitated, and even across the void, Tayson could feel their sudden fear. They had come to kill a child. Now they were beginning to understand what that child truly was. Tayson saw his chance and took it. The persistent dawn surged forward through the gap left by the disabled warship, and ahead of them the stars opened into clear space. They had survived for now. The child woke first. Tayson had given the princess and her daughter the only private cabin on the persistent dawn, and he sat alone in the cockpit watching the stars blur past when he heard small footsteps behind him. He turned to find the girl standing in the doorway with her thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders like a cloak. She watched him with those ancient eyes and said nothing. "Are you hungry?" Tayson asked in a gentle voice. The child tilted her head slightly as if considering the question from every possible angle. "I am called Velith," she finally said. Her voice was soft and careful, like someone who had learned that words could be dangerous. "I am Tayson," he replied. "I know," Velith said. "My mother chose you specifically. Do you know why?" The child walked slowly into the cockpit and climbed into the co-pilot's seat, where she sat with her legs dangling above the floor. She watched many humans at that station. Velith explained. "She said your eyes were different from the others, and that you had sadness in them that meant you understood loss." Tayson felt something tighten in his chest at those words. "Your mother is very observant. She is a princess," Velith said, as if that explained everything. "Princesses must see what others miss, or they do not survive." Tayson studied the child and noticed again those dark patterns shifting beneath her silver skin. They moved more slowly now, as if sleeping, but he could still see them swirling in hypnotic spirals along her arms and neck. "Does it hurt?" Yes, Velith looked down at her own hands where the shadows danced. "Not hurt," she said quietly, "but it frightens people, and that makes me sad." She looked up at him with sudden intensity. "Does it frighten you?" Tayson considered the question carefully. Before answering, "I have seen many strange things in my travels," he said. "I learned long ago that different does not mean dangerous." For the first time since he had met her, the child smiled, and it transformed her face from something eerie into something beautiful. "I like you, Captain Tayson," she announced. "I think you are a good human." She pulled a small tablet from beneath a blanket and began drawing on its surface with her finger. Tayson watched her work and saw images taking shape that made his stomach tighten. Fire consuming cities and darkness, swallowing stars and figures running from shadows that stretched across entire worlds. "Velith," he said gently, "what are you drawing?" "Dreams," she answered without looking up. "I see them when I sleep and sometimes when I am awake." "Are they memories?" The child shook her head. "I do not know what they are, but Mother says I must not show them to anyone." She paused and looked at him with those ancient eyes. "But I think I can show you." Footsteps sounded behind them, and they both turned to see Princess Sareth standing in the doorway. She had changed into clean clothing that Tayson kept for emergencies, and her wounds had been treated with supplies from his medical kit, but she still looked exhausted and pale, and something in her eyes spoke of a deeper sickness that bandages could not fix. "Velith," she said sharply, "return to our cabin." "But Mother, now." The child obeyed instantly and slipped past her mother with the tablet clutched to her chest. Sarath watched her go and then turned her burning gaze to Tayson. "You should not encourage her to speak so freely," the princess said coldly. "She is a child." Tayson replied, "Children need to speak freely. She is not an ordinary child." Sareth moved to the co-pilot seat and sat where her daughter had been moments before. "I owe you an explanation, Captain, and I will give you what I can. You promised me the truth." Tayson reminded her, "You asked me to risk my life, and I deserve to know why." The princess was silent for a long moment, and then she began to speak. "My house was one of the oldest in the Valorian Empire, and we held power for thousands of years. Through tradition and careful alliance." She stared out at the blurring stars with eyes that saw something far away. "1 year ago, a faction of purists seized control of the Imperial Council, and they declared that my house was corrupt and must be eliminated." "Why?" Tayson Eskedser's hands tightened on the armrests of her chair. "Because my daughter's father was not Valorian." Tayson felt surprise, but kept his expression neutral. "I thought your people forbade relationships with other species." "We do," Sareth said bitterly. "My union was a crime against everything my people believe, and when it was discovered, my husband was executed, and I was sentenced to death." Her voice broke slightly. "But I was already pregnant with Veleth and some members of my house. Helped me escape before the sentence could be carried out. They hunted you. They slaughtered everyone who helped me." Sareth confirmed. "Every servant and every guard and every noble who showed me mercy was killed as a warning to others." She turned to look at Tayson with those burning eyes. "That is why I told you that everyone who helps us dies, Captain. Because the Valorians are thorough." Sareth looked away again. "Yes," she whispered, "because the Valorians are thorough." Tayson sensed that there was more to the story, but he did not push instead. He turned to his navigation console and pulled up the coordinates she had given him. "This location is in uncharted space." He said, "What is there?" "Sanctuary," Sareth answered. "A place where my daughter can be safe. Safe from your own people. Safe from everyone." The communication console suddenly beeped with an incoming signal, and Tayson's blood went cold when he read. The source was a galactic-wide broadcast from the Valorian Empire. He opened the channel, and a stern Valorian face appeared on the screen, reading from an official proclamation. "By order of the Imperial Council, the following bounty is declared." The announcer said, "For the confirmed death of the creature designated, Veleth of the Third House, a reward of 100 million credits is offered." Tayson stared at the screen in shock. 100 million credits was more wealth than most planets possessed. "The creature," the announcer continued, "is classified as an extinction variable, and any individual or government harboring this threat will be considered an enemy of the Valorian Empire and all allied civilizations." The broadcast ended and silence filled. The cockpitesan turned to Sareth and saw that she had grown even paler. "Extinction variable," he repeated. "What does that mean?" Sareth closed her eyes, and for a moment she looked like a woman standing at the edge of an abyss. "I have not told you the full truth, Captain," she admitted. "The reason my daughter is hunted is not merely because her birth was forbidden." "Then why?" Sareth opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression of profound guilt and sorrow. "Because of what she is and what she will become." She reached out and gripped his arm with desperate strength. "I have kept secrets from you that I had no right to keep, and if you want to abandon us after you hear the truth, I will not blame you. Tell me." Tayson demanded. Sareth took a deep breath and began to speak words that would change everything. "My daughter's father was not simply from another species," she said. "He was the last surviving member of a race that vanished from the galaxy 10,000 years ago." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He was an architect, Captain, and my daughter carries their power in her blood." Tayson felt the universe shift beneath his feet as the weight of that revelation settled into his mind. The architects were legends and myths and ancient gods who had seeded life throughout the galaxy before disappearing without explanation and now he was carrying their heir toward unknown space with the entire galaxy hunting them. He looked at Sareth and saw tears streaming down her silver face. "There is more," she whispered. "There is always more. The fatal truth I mentioned at the station," she continued, "is not about who hunts us." Her hand trembled against his arm. "It is about what happens to everyone who stays near my daughter." She pulled back her sleeve and Tayson saw dark patterns beneath her skin, identical to those on Velith. "Her power is awakening, Captain, and prolonged exposure to that power is lethal to every known species in the galaxy." She met his eyes with absolute despair. "I am already dying, and now so are you." The alarms screamed through Outpost 7 like wounded animals, and Captain Yun. Tayson dropped his cargo manifest onto the deck of his ship. He had been moments away from departure, and now red lights flashed across every surface of the station, while security teams rushed past his docking port with weapons drawn. Unauthorized vessel entering Dock 14. The station computer announced in its flat mechanical voice. Tayson grabbed his jacket and stepped out onto the main concourse, where a crowd of traders and mechanics had gathered near the observation windows. Through the reinforced glass he could see a ship unlike anything built by human hands, and it drifted toward the emergency dock, trailing fire and atmosphere from a dozen wounds in its hull. The vessel was Valorian in design, and Tayson recognized the elegant curves and silver plating that marked the ships of that proud alien empire. But this ship was dying, and whoever flew it had pushed far beyond any reasonable hope of survival to reach this small human outpost at the edge of explored space. "Everyone stand back," shouted the security chief as her team formed a perimeter around Dock 14. Tayson should have returned to his ship, and he knew this because nothing good ever came from involving yourself in other people's problems. But something made him push through the crowd and follow the security team down the corridor toward the damaged vessel. The airlock of the Valorian ship opened with a grinding sound of broken machinery, and white vapor poured out into the station atmosphere. A figure emerged from that cloud, and Tayson felt his breath catch in his throat. She was tall and slender, with skin the color of pale silver and eyes that burned like captured starlight. Her clothing had once been fine and expensive, but now hung in torn strips stained with blue blood. In her arms, she clutched a bundle wrapped in thermal fabric, and Tayson realized with sudden shock that it was a child. The alien woman took 3 stumbling steps forward before her legs gave out beneath her. Tayson moved without thinking and caught her before she hit the deck, and she weighed almost nothing in his arms, like a creature made of paper and light. "Please," she whispered, and her voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. The security chief approached with her weapon raised and demanded identification from the injured alien, but the woman ignored her completely and fixed her burning eyes on Tayson alone. "You are the captain of the small cargo vessel," she said, and it was not a question. "I am," Tayson answered. "You must take us away from here," the alien woman begged, and her fingers gripped his jacket with desperate strength that seemed impossible from such a weakened body. "You specifically, and no one else, and you must do this now before they find us." "Who are you running from?" Tayson asked. The security chief interrupted and demanded again that the alien identify herself and submit to station protocols. The silver-skinned woman finally turned her gaze to the security officer and spoke with the last remnants of pride that clung to her broken form. "I am Sareth of the Third House and Princess of the Valorian Empire," she announced. The security team exchanged worried glances because the Valorians were a powerful species known throughout the galaxy for their isolationist policies and their contempt for what they called lesser races. Humans were definitely considered lesser by Valorian standards. "Your Highness," the security chief said with careful diplomacy, "we need to contact your government and arrange proper—" "No," Sareth interrupted with sudden ferocity that made everyone step back. "You will contact no one, and you will speak of this to no one. And if you value the lives of everyone on this station, you will let this human take me away right now. She pulled a data chip from somewhere within her ruined clothing and pressed it into Tayson's hand. Coordinates. She whispered to him alone. Take us there, and I will give you payment beyond anything you have ever imagined. And if I refuse... Tayson the Skedsereth looked at him with those burning eyes, and he saw something in them that he had never expected. To see in a proud Valorian princess, he saw complete and utter terror. Everyone who helps us dies. She whispered, I am offering you death, Captain Yun Tayson, and I am begging you to accept it because my daughter deserves a chance to live. The child in her arms stirred, and the thermal fabric fell away from a small face with features similar to her mother but softer and younger. The girl could not have been more than 6 years old by human standards, as she looked up at Tayson, with eyes that seemed far too old for such a young face. Then Tayson noticed something that made his blood run. Cold dark patterns moved beneath the child's silver skin like living shadows, swimming just below the surface. They swirled and shifted in hypnotic spirals that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Sereth saw him notice, and the terror in her eyes doubled. Please. She whispered again. The security chief was calling for backup and talking about containment protocols and diplomatic incidents station. Administrators were rushing toward them, demanding explanations and threatening consequences. The crowd pressed closer with curiosity and fear, while the dying Valorian ship groaned and settled deeper against the dock. Tayson looked at the data chip in his hand, and then at the desperate mother clutching her strange child. He thought about his small cargo ship and his simple life hauling goods between stations, and he thought about how that life would end the moment he made this choice. He thought about the dark patterns moving beneath the child's skin, and the terror in a princess's eyes, and the words she had spoken, everyone who helps us dies. Can you walk? He asked Sereth. I will crawl if I must. She answered. Tayson stood and pulled the princess to her feet and wrapped one arm around her waist to support her weight. Captain Yun, the security chief shouted, I cannot allow you to file a complaint. Tayson interrupted as he guided Sereth toward the corridor that led to his docking port. Hey! The security chief yelled and raised her weapon. Tayson turned and looked at her with calm eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy to be frightened by a pointed gun. She is a princess of a major galactic power, he said. Whatever she is running from is bigger than this station can handle, and if you try to keep her here, you will bring that trouble down on everyone. He nodded toward the dying Valorian ship. Look at what they did to her vessel and ask yourself if you want that kind of attention. The security chief hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Tayson moved. He half carried Sereth down the corridor with the child pressed between them, and the crowd parted before them in confusion behind them. He could hear shouting and the sound of running boots, but he did not look back. The airlock of the persistent dawn opened at his command, and he guided the princess and her daughter into the cargo hold before sealing the door behind them. Strap in, he ordered as he moved to the cockpit. Sereth collapsed into the navigator's seat and clutched her child against her chest while Tayson's fingers flew across the control panels. The station was broadcasting demands for him to stop and wait for security, but he ignored every message. The docking clamps released and his ship surged forward into the black void of space behind them. Outpost 7 grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among millions. Tayson entered the coordinates from the data chip and felt his ship turn toward unknown space. In the seat beside him, the Valorian princess held her daughter and wept silently with relief and exhaustion. The child watched Tayson with those ancient eyes, and the dark patterns beneath her skin continued their endless dance. He had made his choice, and now he would discover what it cost him. Stars stretched into lines as the persistent dawn jumped toward whatever fate awaited them all.